1812, ignoring the advice of his closest advisors, Napoleon invaded Russia. Never in living memory had so large an army been assembled. Italians, Poles, Germans, French, more than 600,000 men from every corner of his empire. Napoleon prophesied that the war would be over in 20 days.
An army of 600,000, it would seem to be absolutely irresistible, no matter what happened. He'll simply pour in enough men to overwhelm the Russians, force them to engage in battle, and defeat them.
Napoleon's army trudged slowly across Russia's immense spaces. He hoped to annihilate his enemy at once, but the Russians would not give battle. As the days passed, the blazing heat of the Russian summer began to take its toll. Soldiers fell out from exhaustion, sickness, and desertion. Thousands every day. After 2 months, before Napoleon had fought a single battle, 150,000 soldiers were out of action. At last, with summer ending, the Russians turned and faced their enemy at the crossroads village of Borodino. Moscow, the holy city of Russia, was at stake. The Battle of Borodino was a brutal slugfest. Napoleon threw his enormous army at the Russians in a frontal assault, showing little of his old strategic subtlety.
This was a wild attack. They were killing each other. There were deaths without stop. It was horrific. The battle began at 6:30 in the morning and lasted until 3 in the afternoon. At that point, both armies were exhausted.
The Russians fought the Emperor's armies to a standstill. The next day, they withdrew, leaving Napoleon proclaiming victory. Moscow was at his mercy, but the Russians refused to make peace. As Napoleon's army entered the city, he found it almost deserted. That night, Moscow began to burn. Mountains of red, rolling flames, Napoleon recalled later, like immense waves of the sea. Oh, it was the most grand, the most sublime, and the most terrifying sight the world ever beheld.
The Russians burned Moscow themselves. And when Moscow went up in flames, this was the worst blow to Napoleon's army. Napoleon couldn't stay in Moscow.
Fearing the approach of winter, but reluctant to abandon his conquest, Napoleon wrote the Tsar proposing negotiations. The Tsar responded with icy silence. After 5 weeks of waiting, Napoleon bitterly ordered his soldiers home. On October 19th, he led his men, laden with spoils, out of Moscow through the gate of Kaluga. It was a warm fall day. Three weeks later, it began to snow. The Russian winter had arrived early. Temperatures fell to 22 degrees below zero. Napoleon's soldiers froze in the open countryside. Our lips stuck together, one soldier wrote. Our nostrils froze. We seemed to be marching in a world of ice. Food ran out. Horses died by the thousands. Hungry soldiers quarreled over the horseflesh. They were fighting starvation, cold, fatigue, disease, and the Cossacks. The Cossacks harried Napoleon's flanks, tearing at his army as if it were a wounded animal.
The army is being eaten away because it is being attacked on all sides. So the army fell apart, little by little. The French army no longer existed as a fighting force.
Napoleon watched as his army died. Fearing capture, he carried in a little black leather bag tied around his neck a vial of poison. 6 months before, he had crossed into Russia with more than 500,000 soldiers, confident of victory. Now, on December 5th, rumors of a coup in Paris forced him to abandon his troops and head back to the French capital. As his sled made its way across Europe, he told a companion, "It's just one step between the sublime and the ridiculous."
He lost 500,000 men, a staggering sum. Out of the 600,000 men who went in, 93,000 came back.
It was the beginning of the end, his former foreign minister Charles Talleyrand said. Smelling blood, Britain, Prussia, Russia, and Sweden united against him. Only Austria, ruled by his wife's father, wavered. Clinging to the hope that one decisive battle could turn his luck around, Napoleon rallied France for yet another campaign in Central Europe.
He just was fighting here, fighting there, fighting the next place, hopelessly outnumbered. Could never win, but still fighting like mad.
In the fall of 1813, the Allies caught Napoleon at Leipzig, where they outnumbered him 2-1, and punished his armies in a bruising battle that lasted 3 days. The legend of Napoleon's invincibility was over. His armies were now in retreat everywhere in Europe. A year ago, he said, the whole of Europe was marching alongside of us. Today, the whole of Europe is marching against us. In 2 months, he lost 400,000 men. Still, he fought on. There was nothing left to do but fight, he said. Yet every day, our chances grew smaller and smaller. By the beginning of 1814, Napoleon was again in Paris when he learned that the Allies had invaded France itself. Fearing the worst, he began burning his private papers. Even Austria, led by Marie Louise's father, Francis I, had come in for the kill. "Don't worry," Napoleon told his wife and son. "We shall beat Papa Francis. Trust me." On the morning of January 25th, they said goodbye. He would never see his wife or his son again. In a last desperate campaign fought across France, Napoleon displayed all of his old brilliance. But 85,000 Frenchmen stood no chance against 350,000 Allies. On March 31st, 1814, the Allies marched down the Champs-Élysées. The war was all but over. Now, even his own marshals turned against him. When he prepared to summon what remained of his army to march on Paris, they refused to fight any longer. On April 12, 1814, Napoleon picked up a pen and renounced his throne. His Majesty appeared to be